Okay, so this is how I built my garden ramp. So my garden is slightly higher at the top end than it is in the bottom. And because this is a fairly new build property and the previous owner didn't do any work whatsoever to the garden, it was a completely blank canvas. So the entire garden is now being landscaped, or in the process of being landscaped. So this is basically how I built my garden ramp. So the ramp itself is roughly 6 meters in length and 1 meters in width. It's made out of wood, hardcore, concrete or mortar, and fake grass. The cost was just over £300 for all the material. Obviously the price will vary depending on where you buy your material. I will put a list in the description box of everything I used to build the ramp. I didn't use any kind of specialized tools. I basically just had a drill, a jigsaw, and a few other things such as hammer and so on, and screws to build the actual ramp. So no specialist kind of tools required, and I'm not a master carpenter, so I think any kind of keen DIY should be able to build this ramp. I think it took around 2 weeks on and off to build it, not working every single day, just kind of doing a little bit at a time. It was fairly easy, though obviously digging the holes for the posts and mixing the mortar was quite hard work and so on, but I think most people should be able to do this kind of project quite easy. So before I began, I needed a general idea of how the ramp would look and the kind of thickness or the steepness of the actual ramp and the thickness and the height of the wood I would need. So basically all I did was put some bamboo canes into the ground at the top and the bottom and on the sides, tied the string to the bamboo, and that then gave me a general outline of how the ramp would look, so I could then measure the actual height between the ground and the string on the bamboo canes and get the general idea of how my ramp should look and what kind of size wood I would need to order and so on. So before you begin, just make an outline of the actual ramp using string and sticks and you should be good to go. So here is from start to finish. So the first step was to add the first two sections, the right and left hand sides. So to ensure that both of these were spaced equally apart, I made myself some spaces using a piece of batten. You can see I attached 2 blocks of wood to the underside of the batten, so these fit in perfectly with the actual framework. You can see they fit in there. And these battens or these spaces measure 102 millimeters because the grass is 100 millimeters in width. I gave myself just a little bit of extra breathing space to ensure that the grass fitted correctly. So I've used these 2 spaces on each section, so the top section, the middle section and the bottom section. So this ensures that the entire framework is nice and straight and, more importantly, spaced equally apart. So there's a good tip. You can also use some clamps as well to clamp them in place while you're waiting for the cement to go off and so on. So using those 2 spaces did make my life a lot easier. I didn't have to get the tape measure out every 10 seconds to ensure that it was straight. I just used these and a couple of clamps and everything kind of fit into place nice and easy. So you can now see that I have completed the framework for the ramp. So the ramp is in 3 sections, so the top section, a middle section and the bottom section. Each section has its own set of posts, so I've attached 2 posts on the left and right hand side to the top section, 4 posts on either side on the middle section and 2 posts on either side on the lower section, plus a piece of wood across the bottom to frame the entire thing off. So I've attached the post with some screws, probably 2 screws to each post, some nice chunky screws, and I've made sure that the posts are actually below the top of the wood line because the grass is 30 millimeters in height, or a 30 millimeter pile. I want the grass to sit within the frame and be near enough flush to the top of the wood line. So I've ensured that each post is at least 30 millimeters below the actual line I want. So that's it. So in terms of actually cutting the wood, obviously in 3 sections you need to ensure that the wood is cut at the correct angle to match the gradient of the slope. So once the first section goes in, you can then just get your middle section before you attach the posts, put it flush to the ground, put it flush to the wood, side by side, and then that should then give you the general idea of the angle you need to cut. So draw a line once the wood is flush to the top section, draw a line with a pencil. You can then cut that. That then should give you the perfect angle. I made sure that once I cut the first section, I also did the same for the left or right hand side, so each section is identical, so I use that as a template. And again, once you concrete in the middle section, you can do the same in the last section. So just put your wood flush to the ground, flush to the piece of wood side by side, draw a line with a pencil, and then that should give you your perfect angle to ensure that the ramp is, you know, perfectly balanced left and right hand side, and so on. So you can also see that I've added the hardcore to the ramp. You can use any hardcore you want basically. This I've used MOT type 1. You can order a big jumbo bag from a supplier. I think it costs about 45 quid, something like that. I've added the hardcore. I could have used, you know, I could have just filled it in with concrete if I wanted to, but this has made my life a little bit easier by adding a hardcore to the actual base. If the soil underneath the framework is a little bit too soft, you may have to remove some of it, say perhaps 5 inches of it, until you hit some firmer ground. In my case, the soil was absolutely rock hard because, you know, it's had membrane and carpet on top of it. I've been walking up and down it for at least 2 months. The ground was just rock solid. All the grass and weeds had died a long time ago, so I didn't have to kind of remove any vegetation or soil. I didn't have a compactor or a whacker plate to compact the hardcore. What I did, I made sure I put it down, leveled it all out, gave it a good soak with a hose pipe, and I used an old slab to just basically whack it down as hard as I could. Did that for probably half an hour, if not more. Whacked down all the hardcore into place, and you know, that then compacted it to a reasonable level. Obviously, because this isn't going to be taking anything other than foot traffic, you know, the actual compaction of the hardcore doesn't have to be, you know, rock solid compared to, say, a driveway, which will be taking the weight of a, you know, a 2-ton vehicle and so on. So if you don't have a whacker plate, which I didn't want a particularly higher one because that's going to add a lot of cost to the actual project, I just put the hardcore down, whacked it with a slab for half hour, you know, gave it a good soaking with a hose, and it compacted down probably at least another 2 inches from its original form, and so on. So hopefully that will hold in place. I don't see why it won't. And underneath, I made sure that there was some membrane just to help keep the hardcore in place and stuff. And the ground underneath that hardcore was absolutely rock solid. No grass, no weeds, no loose soil. It was just completely compacted soil. So that shouldn't be any kind of issues. So basically, you know, that's that step. Now I've done the frames complete. I now have to add some battens to the side of the framework to pin the grass down to, and so on. I've now added some battens to the side of the framework, so you can see that these battens were cut into individual sections to fit in between the posts. Ideally, I would like to have just attached them in one complete length, except for the top and bottom part. But because the post couldn't be set any lower below the wood because there wouldn't be enough support, I've had to cut these individually. So again, these are exactly 30 millimeters below the top of the wood. And once I do add the layer of mortar or concrete on top of the hardcore, this also allows me to use a piece of wood and basically fit in between the frame of the framework. I can then use a piece of wood to scrape all the mortar down so it comes down nice and level and smooth. So even though adding these battens took quite a long time because I had to cut each section to fit in between the posts, they actually made my life a lot easier to ensure that the concrete or mortar was laid nice and level and nice and smooth, because I could use these as a guide to scrape all the cement down into place. So yes, the battens were quite a fiddly job to fit, quite time consuming because I had to cut each batten to fit in between each post, but in the end they probably made my life slightly easier. And of course, you don't necessarily need these battens, because the actual fake grass, when I did eventually put the fake grass on top of the concrete, it actually held in place pretty perfectly without any kind of support, without any kind of screws or nails in place. But because the fake grass is on the ramp, just to ensure it has a bit of extra grip, I did decide to put these battens on. And I did pin the fake grass to these battens, so there you go. I've now added the first layer of mortar on top of the hardcore, so basically you can now see I've got a little bit of fake grass. This is just a sample I ordered just to ensure that it fits in place and looks natural and so on. So you can see I've added half of the mortar bed to the framework. So I've used a 3-part sharp sand, 1-part cement mixture, so it's a nice strong mix which should last a long time, shouldn't crack. Even though it's only probably around 2 inches thick, it's nice and strong, it's on top of a solid base. I don't see having any issues with it. So again, I mixed all this by hand, just using a wheelbarrow and a shovel to mix it into a wheelbarrow. I went for kind of a semi thick kind of mix, not too runny, because I obviously didn't want it kind of running all the way down to the end of the bottom. So once I added the mortar, again I just used a batten, and the battens that I attached earlier to the side, these were a perfect guide, so I could just literally scrape the cement, and you know, the entire cement would be equal on both the left and right hand side. So you can now see that I have completed the mortar base from the top to the bottom. So again, I used a 3-part sharp sand, 1-part cement mixture. You can also see that the battens are still exposed, and these battens, as I said earlier, I used these as a guide. So I just put a piece of wood in between the framework and scraped the cement down until it was nice and equal on both sides. I've also added in the bottom of the ramp 2 pipes which I have bedded into the actual mortar. I put these in place before I added the mortar, and I will cut these up flush, so they're flush to the actual mortar bed, and I then will drill some holes in the bottom of the wood, so the water should then flow down to the bottom of the ramp, down through these plastic pipes and out through the bottom of the wood. So again, I probably laid the top section a couple of days ago and the bottom section around a day ago. I would also always recommend that you give mortar around 2 or 3 days to set before you put anything on top of it, as you know, generally 24 hours is a bit too soon. Around 2 to 3 days, it has a much better strength rate after that time. You can also see that I've put the fake grass down, the sample down, just to give me a general idea of the height of the grass. That sits perfectly flush with the top of the framework. So yeah, so the next step basically is to get the fake grass, roll it down, pin it to the battens using screws, or you can use nails or whatever's available, whatever's recommended. And I will cut it up with a standing knife in the bottom, so hopefully it fits in perfectly. So the next step is to see the ramp with the fake grass in place. So here's the finished article, and the fake grass has been fitted. So you can see that the fake grass, which is 1 meter in width, fits perfectly within the framework. I've obviously attached it with some screws on both the left and right hand side to the battens, which I put down as I showed you earlier. I've obviously cut the grass to length. Obviously I bought it in a 7 meter length, and it's only just over 5 meters, or just under 6 meters. And it just fits perfectly. Pretty easy to cut with a standing knife. Don't worry about cutting it. It's pretty straightforward to cut. And you can see it just fits in real perfect. I was actually surprised how well it fitted in. In terms of it being secure, absolutely rock solid. It doesn't move at all. I'm not even, convinced you actually need to put battens to screw the grass down. I think just grass sat on top of a rough mortar bed actually provides excellent grip between the two surfaces. Or you could use an adhesive. You can buy adhesives to apply to the grass and the concrete, which should hold it in place. So if you don't want to put battens, you probably don't actually need them. I just put them because I thought grass and the slope might move around, but I actually put it down, walked up and down it several times without screwing it down, and it didn't move, a millimeter. So if you don't want to put battens, don't bother. So here's some of the fake grass which is still left over. So I had a little bit left over. You can see probably another meter or so, and you can see the back's a nice solid rubber backing on this particular grass. So this is actually a kind of good quality grass, not a cheap quality grass. Some cheap quality grasses may just be attached to a basic membrane, and I wouldn't recommend these for a ramp because they probably won't stay in place. So this one has a nice thick rubber backing or synthetic backing. So you can see it again, it looks really, really good. I'm really happy with the results. Hopefully the grass will last a long time. In terms of its grip, you're probably thinking, well, won't walking up and down a ramp, especially after it's been raining, be slippery? And the answer to that is no. This grass is absolutely rock solid. I've wet it with a hose pipe, I've walked up and down it, I've even taken a wheelbarrow with full of soil, and I haven't slipped once. So it gives you perfect grip in both dry conditions and wet conditions. I would say the grip is equal to walking on rough concrete or rough cement. So in terms of walking up and down it, it's perfectly safe, excellent grip, just providing you buy a good quality grass. Obviously not all grasses will be the same, but if you buy a good quality grass, the grip should be excellent. So there it is. Thanks for watching.